History.
We shall never surrender.
Politics.
Where there is discord, may we bring harmony.
Current affairs.
Going to Pizza Express in Woking is an unusual thing for me to do.
Conspiracies.
Ask not what your country can do for you.
We'll stop terrorists from coming after us.
I just received a beautiful letter from Kim Jong-un.
It concludes that Iraq has chemical and biological weapons.
I'm not guilty of harassing anyone.
Well, I'm not a crook.
This is the Political Dark Side Podcast. And now, here's your host, Matthew Howland.
If you only knew the power of the dark side.
Addy Adds is a best-selling ghostwriter, author, geopolitical commentator, reporter, and public intelligence analyst whose work has been featured in The Gateway Pundit and Unlimited Hangout. Addy has extensively covered the recent Ghislaine Maxwell trial from New York and is joining me to talk all things Maxwell and Epstein. Addy, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well, Matthew. Thank you. Likewise, sir, for having me on. I'm doing well. I actually got sick around Christmas, so I'm definitely feeling, I think, back to better 100% now. But it was fortuitous timing that I got sick because it was right. That's why I missed the first full day of deliberations because I just couldn't get out of bed. It wasn't that bad. It was like a mild flu, but it was just like exhaustion and then muscle aches mostly. So it wasn't too bad. I'm glad to be on your show, man. I appreciate the invite. I always try to, do shows when people want me on. So.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for coming on. My thing's a relatively small show at the minute, but I'm working on it. It's
sure.
Finding your feet with the whole thing.
Yeah, definitely. And the canceling doesn't help.
No, well, we'll see if this episode, how long it lives on YouTube, but
sure.
We'll see
it's
how we
usually
get on.
Not until you get to a certain level, and then even then, it's like seems like they have some people on their radar, but like once you cross that Rubicon, so to speak, you're like a target for censoring. Yeah,
especially if you monetize. I don't monetize, so that they're probably less likely to be too bothered. But we'll see. I would urge everyone to check out your work on Twitter and YouTube. I'll post some links onto the video and in the podcast descriptions and whatnot.
Okay. I'm trying to send people to Rockfin now. As you mentioned, I'm still on YouTube. I have 2 channels there, but I actually don't even tweet it out anymore. I haven't recently. I just tweet out my Rockfin for video and then for audio, my podcast. But other than that, I don't promo the YouTubes because I've been knocked off there so many times.
Yeah, makes sense. You covered the ins and outs of the trial and the legal processes, but I was hoping to try and paint in slightly broader strokes about the significance of the guilty verdicts and what it means to the bigger picture of conspiracy culture. From my understanding of it, Maxwell's found guilty of bringing minors to Epstein to abuse. So what's your summary of how the trial went?
Wow. Yeah, it's a lot to say for sure. Many angles we could go and attack this from. So I'm not really sure where you want me to focus on, but it was, a limited scope of a prosecution, a narrow prosecution. I've heard it been called very secretive by the government for sure, who is, as they do, doing the prosecuting versus Ghislaine Maxwell. And, the government tends to overcharge and I would say overconvict. They try to force people into plea deals by hanging a very large excessive sentence over their heads so that they cooperate in some sort of way if they have intelligence or if they, just want to, not be burdened with facing 40 years or more in prison. They'll just take a lesser charge or one of the several charges, for example, to do that. So in that sense, that was an anomaly because Ghislaine Maxwell was undercharged, I would say. And the verdict, which was a mixed verdict, was actually what I predicted. I didn't explicitly say, I don't think, how many I thought would stick, but I was thinking it would be closer to 3 than 6. But it was, only the enticement charge did not stick, which I thought would be the only one to do so. So for sure. So I was pretty wrong on that end. But as far as the mixed verdict, I was correct on that. In the sense that it was such a narrow scope of a prosecution by the United States, it feels like a victory almost, even though we know she should be charged and convicted of much more. The people that I think understand the history at a deeper level than certainly what has been portrayed in the mainstream media. But as far as my own subjective experience of the trial, that's something separate, I think, from the objective intel. Wherever you want to take it, though.
Yeah, well, I was trying to, like I said, paint in broader strokes about the whole thing as kind of like an introduction to people who aren't necessarily familiar with this topic. I mean, like you said, there's a certain amount of coverage in the mainstream, but it's not necessarily what people in conspiracy culture are looking at. The two things don't necessarily correlate. For example, on the BBC News this morning, they were doing a piece about the January the 6th Capitol riots.
Of course.
Yeah, happy anniversary, by the way.
Wow, yeah.
So
yeah,
they were giving it all that about QAnon and saying, oh, these crazy people believing in the pedophile cabal and all this. But at the same time as presenting this, they had the news ticker at the bottom talking about Maxwell being guilty. And it's kind of like, you can't be presenting this and saying all these people are nuts. And at the bottom there, you're talking about like literally the guilty conviction of somebody who is amongst the elites who has been convicted of minor sex trafficking.
See, I missed that. I don't really watch the BBC, but
you shouldn't watch it, obviously.
A screenshot of that's like a Babylon Bee article. It sounds like, let me turn this off. It really sounds like it. But that's something that I've actually discussed before too with people close to me. And it was, I think, even before, because I got to the party kind of late in the timeline, but maybe young relatively. I'm not really sure. But for me, it wasn't until, like 2016 or even 2018, because that kind of came at this sideways from learning about prison corruption. So that's kind of where I entered this sphere via. But it's the Q thing. I think it was, if not from the start, it was at some point co-opted. Q Intel Pro type of operation. Maybe it could be. I'll pose it as a question to discredit the fact that this sort of stuff actually does go on by making anyone who talks about it seem like a Looney Tune Q-tard, as we call them.
Yes, the thread of how I've written this podcast out is essentially going to be that, with the conclusion roughly being the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. But we'll get to all that.
yeah,
as
definitely.
We progress. You said
there's a gray area for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. You said the trial was limited in scope. What do you mean by that? Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, just 4 witnesses: Jane, Kate, Carolyn, and then Annie Farmer, who was the only witness who did not use a pseudonym or a partial name to suppress their identity. And this is probably even a better point, is the very limited evidence. I actually didn't bring this point up in the show I was on just before chatting with you, Mr. Howland. I was on Kriston T. Harris's show, The Rundown Live, and we were doing a dual cast on the 6th and the Maxwell trial. But yeah, to further elaborate on that, Maxwell's verdict, I think, was like a bittersweet a victory in a way. I think I kind of lost my train of thought there, but
you were saying the limited scope. You were talking about there wasn't that much evidence. I think I've heard you mention there was something like 40 hours of video introduced when there was about 40,000 hours.
I think it was images, and or videos. I want to say it was just images though, because the only video we saw, which again was partially redacted, which is another characteristic of the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, is the overabundance of redactions, I would say, as far as evidence admitted into court. And not just that, but the fact that out of some 40,000, I think it was 39,760, something like that. But effectively 40,000 photos. They used just 40 for the trial and admitting that stuff as evidence. And it was pretty bland stuff. I mean, for the mainstream media, it's juicy, right? It's Epstein and Maxwell at the Queen's cabin. It's Epstein and Maxwell 30,000 feet up, giving the massage, and Maxwell's got her cleavage hanging out. And, so it's like good front page material in that sense, but it's not really anything new that we didn't know. I would say with the exception of the Fidel Castro picture, which we didn't see, but we heard referenced multiple times. I'm not sure I've heard of that before. I think that was new for everybody. The fact that Epstein at least met Fidel Castro, if not knew him. But other than that, it's like, what about the other 39,000, 700 images or whatever it is? Where are those? And what I was going to say is I didn't point this out on Kristan's show, but that's the stuff that was just talked about in court. That's not all of the media and evidence, to be evidence, possible evidence that Epstein owned. It wasn't all the blackmail, it wasn't all the photos, all the videos. That was just what they talked about in this particular aspect. And another thing that wasn't explained is why were there already FBI evidence stickers or tape tags on evidence that was at Epstein's apartment? That's bizarre. It's like, and the FBI didn't have an explanation for that.
Why would they? That is unusual. Do you think, in terms of the scope, and given that Maureen Comey was the prosecutor, do you think that it was almost set up in such a way as to make the trial much smaller than it should have been, keep out certain names of the trial, like you say, only introduce these 4 witnesses, have much less evidence, as it were, to try and just, right, we'll convict Maxwell on this, that'll be the story. Her and Jeffrey Epstein are the only 2 people doing this sort of thing. She was bringing minors to him to abuse. That's it. He's dead. She's in prison. Is that essentially what the target was, do you think? And what's the significance of Maureen Comey?
Yeah, I think so. I think they're trying to wrap a bow on it and tidy it away. Maureen Comey, that's a great point you bring up, is why out of all the prosecutors they could have had, they chose someone who not only worked on what was supposed to be the Epstein trial, but whose father used to be the director of the FBI and someone who went viciously after Donald Trump and donated to Hillary Clinton. That just seems very inappropriate, That's what I think, and it's a mistake, certainly from a PR angle. It just doesn't look good. It looks very nepotistic. I gotta say, they only showed up once. I got one time I got them entering into the courtroom on day 6, day 1 of week 2. But other than that, they were just completely invisible. And in that sense, it just adds to the shroud of dubiousness that grows out of the government's actions, I think, during the course of this trial. Judge Nathan taking 3 days off because she's going to Washington, D.C. to see something about her pending promotion to the Second Circuit, which is one level below the Supreme Court. I thought that was inappropriate. And, Matthew Lee, I think, agreed with me on that one. Inner City Press, who's been doing, great coverage. He covers nothing but SDNY trials, and he's a lawyer himself. So he really understands what's going on in a legal sense, in a way that I do not. But yeah, I kind of try to bring the intelligence ties to it. And, Maureen Comey has direct ties to American intelligence, her father, of course. So, yeah, it was quite interesting as well. What was the reason that the judge gave for not allowing the trial to be broadcast? Not in the public's interest or dangerous to the public or something along those lines? Yeah, I can't remember the exact quote. I should get it later today. It was something to do with the salaciousness or the content of the evidence, I think. But even that, it's like the evidence that was shown wasn't even, a lot of that, like, why did they redact the walkthrough video? You can find that online. Anybody who just knows how to use a search engine. Of Epstein's property. Yeah, just type in Epstein, what search and seizure video, or Epstein. What was it? It was the police raid, Palm Beach raid. I think it was October 2005, and it'll pop up. But they redacted in court. It's like, what? It doesn't make any sense. A lot of the way it ended. In that sense, it made it like somewhat of a victory, but like bittersweet, I would say, because a couple decades. That's like the bare minimum, I think, that she would get. If we're trying to satiate the public with a meal, that's like half a peanut butter sandwich, maybe. Like, it's like, what do you actually think comes next here? You want more. So very interesting development yesterday. While I was in the city, I went to the courthouse again just to do some, it was a day trip, which I do. I went to a few different addresses related to Jeffrey Epstein's network. It was 116 56th Street, which was a townhouse that I believe Wexner owned. He gave it to Epstein. Epstein gave it to Maxwell. And then Maxwell sold it 2018, 2019 to, can't remember his name, but some rich guy for $15 million. I said a video there, 30 Van Dam Street, which was tied to Mark Epstein and his ex-girlfriend, who does photography of young children. Don't know if anything dubious is going on there, but I called her, got no response back. Really, she said, I have no information for you. Have a great day, I think was the quote. So it's polite, at least. Yeah. But she wanted to know who I was working for. So that was interesting. I told her I was independent, and I don't know. Maybe if it was ABC, would she have said something? Who knows? We'll never know. But in that sense, I've just been doing day trips. But the 19th of this month is I think the hearing for the motion for a new trial, due to the fact that this juror came out. His name is Scotty David, which is his first and middle names. Said he had a history of sexual abuse in his past, and that he talked about kind of using that to persuade the other jurors, or at least inform them that the memories aren't always 100% there, which I think is the case with pretty much any memory, right? But in that sense, the question or the questionnaire, juror questionnaire, was brought up. Was he already asked about this? Is this an impartial juror? They want a new trial entirely. They don't even want to hear what the juror has to say, Christian Everdell in the defense. But the government did open an inquiry into this, hearing due within a month. And then on the 2nd will be the government response. And then a week later, on the 9th of February, next month, will be the defense once more. So it's definitely extended this Maxwell saga, at least the trial chapter of it. Yeah, it is a shame that we can't watch it on TV. I had hours of entertainment watching the Kyle Rittenhouse trial. Oh, I'm sure. I tuned out for that, I gotta say. I was just working on some other stuff at the time, and for me it was like an all or nothing thing, and it was like a nothing in that case. I just hope that justice, he was acquitted, and he was, so I was satisfied with that. So on paper, from what I can understand, on paper and legally at this stage,
we're essentially just looking at two people with criminal fetishes. So in our circles, though, there's of course a lot more to it than that. I mean, I remember the day Jeffrey Epstein is found dead by whatever means it happens. I remember thinking that was the most significant day since 9/11. Since then, obviously, we've had COVID, and that's kind of waylaid the story, as it were. But so what you alluded to coming into interest in Epstein through a prison justice system. So can you elaborate on what got you interested to start with, and what's your broad opinion of what is actually going on there as opposed to just those two liking minors?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll answer the, how I got into it kind of. I guess I had always loved YouTube. I'd used it since middle school, pretty much regularly. Now I don't know if I took any breaks as far as YouTube. I just thought it was amazing. You could learn all this information and see all these videos from around the world. Now it's definitely a different beast entirely than it was certainly in 2005 and 6 and 7.
Just to ask, how old are you? Sorry.
I'm 26.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm getting on a bit then.
Okay. How old are you?
34.
Okay.
That was just for context of what you've seen live is what I'm asking, obviously. But
yeah. Okay, sure. Yeah. I mean, I vaguely remember 9/11. We talked about it at school. I think I was in kindergarten. I remember discussing it at the dinner table a bit.
You would have been 6 at the time.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Roughly, yeah.
Yeah. It would have been 6. I remember that. But I didn't. It wasn't like I understood the whole thing. When you're that young, when you're a child. So, but I was there pretty much since the start for YouTube, more or less. But I just regret not posting sooner because I had always wanted to, and I actually did. I think when I was in like 7th grade. But I didn't stick with it. I was very occupied with sports, for most of my childhood. I wish I was a little bit more concerned about academics in hindsight, or at least to the same degree. Because, I think it's some degree of truth to how you do one thing is how you do everything or most things, right? I would always, I'd watch lectures from Yale, and I was like, man, this is crazy. You can find this on the internet. And then I got into podcasts pretty early, I think before it really blew up, which it has in the past couple of years. And in college, I would listen to them pretty much every day. So I got to learning about all the, very, very different topics. For me, it was more about like performance, almost like self-help podcasts I would listen to. Like Tim Ferriss was probably my biggest inspiration as far as podcaster goes. And that's what I tried to actually emulate. And it morphed into author podcasts, and then kind of an everything geopolitical author. I'll talk to professional athletes, whoever, right? If they have something to teach people. And then I found this going back just a bit in 2018, this YouTuber, Sean Atwood, who I was just on a show the other day.
Yeah, I saw that. That was good.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, that was a really fun roundtable for sure. And I just slowly started watching his videos. He would do these short 10-minute videos or 5 minutes. They were just question videos, which I think he still has that playlist on. He's had to take a lot of videos down to stay on.
Yeah, he got thrown off at one point, I think.
Yeah, he did. Fortunately, he was able to get it back. I still haven't been able to do that. I would love to, though, because my channel a year ago, like 2 days ago, I lost my channel. I want to say, I'm guessing here, really ridiculous first week of 2021. I think that a lot of us had, but that was when I first broke through on the Gateway Pundit and Twitter and such, and then lost my channel. But yeah, so Sean got his channel back, and he would do these fight stories from prison, and these stories from prison about the food and what the showers were like. It was just so interesting. I don't know. I would binge watch him for hours. I would get home. I worked at this really crappy customer service job, and I would just binge watch Sean Atwood videos or I love World War II documentaries too. I think that's a great way to learn about a lot of this stuff that we're talking about. Yeah, and from that point on, I read his books, and I got into Epstein later when he started to cover it more and more.
Yeah. So your broad opinion of what's happening then? An intelligence operation, or?
Oh, right. Yeah, the second part. I forgot to answer that.
Sorry, it's all right.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think, an intelligence operation. It's multiple things to multiple people, I would say. But yeah, at the end of the day, that's who runs this particular trafficking operation. There are definitely trafficking operations that don't happen in the realm of intelligence, which I actually think I haven't pointed out before. I thought it would be obvious to people, but sometimes the government protects these things, right? They use it as a weapon in their kind of a dark arts arsenal, right? If we want to call it that, and in that sense, we got Ari Ben Minash, who is former Israeli intelligence, I think for the military. He asserted or stated that Epstein was recruited by the Mossad via Bob Maxwell. Epstein's actually been to the Mirrors. I think it was the Mirror that Maxwell worked at. His office several times.
In the mid-'80s, yeah, he was there a few times, which predates him knowing Ghislaine Maxwell, from what I'm aware.
Yeah, you're on it. I was teaching this. She wants to remain anonymous, but this person at the trial who's associated with a pretty big outlet, anyone would know it. And she actually was pretty smart. Because she was like, I just keep coming back to Barr, to William Barr, and I was like, wow, that's a bingo, I would say, in this game for playing multiple rounds of Epstein bingo. And so we talked about the Barr connection with the Dalton School and how his father not only he was the headmaster there, Barr's father. And
Donald Barr, his father,
yeah, and the one who hired Epstein initially. So maybe that's when he was recruited, right? Who knows for sure? He allegedly said he was part of the CIA in the 80s and then later retracted that. I think someone asserted that, but I didn't see a source for that. That might have been word of mouth. But speaking of that, I met someone who told me they used to be kind of part of the adult film industry, and was telling me that at one shoot in like the mid 2000s, like 05 or 04, one of the hangers on they weren't actresses, they were actually just like high class prostitutes or escorts, and they were saying one of their clients' name was Epstein, Jeffrey Epstein. So that I'd never heard that before, and it's like one of those word of mouth testimonies that's really cool. So that was pretty cool to learn that. But yeah, intelligence, I think 100% with the CIA's permission, if not in cooperation with, because those lines overlap going back to World War II. Like I mentioned, a great way to study this sort of stuff, but certainly a Mossad. Ari Ben Minash asserts that, both of them, Ghislaine Maxwell and Epstein, were either assets or agents, which that line in itself is kind of blurred too, I think, sometimes. But another note on Barr is he was also the Attorney General during the 80s when Herbert Walker Bush was in power, and actively covering up the Franklin scandal. Likewise with the Epstein scandal, he was the Attorney General for Donald Trump. So really interesting time in there.
And yeah, it's certainly strange that William Barr is the Attorney General at the time Epstein the second time is arrested and then subsequently dies. What is technically in William Barr's custody?
Yes. Yeah, that's a good point.
That's not ideal. And just as a side note about Donald Barr, I was reading that he actually, for whatever reason, wrote a book called Space Relations, which was about a planet ruled by oligarchs who engage in child sex slavery.
Yeah.
Make of that what you will.
Yes. That person I mentioned brought that up, and I was like, wow, you did some research there. Yeah, that is true. Bestiality too, I think. I haven't read it, but that's what I've heard. Ryan told me that. Ryan Dawson did. So
okay.
Yeah, it's out there. Yeah, for sure. People have done their research on William Barr's father, Donald Barr.
Yeah, it's very, very strange. Like you were alluding to, like, looking at World War II stuff, it's a gateway. So it's like the JFK assassination. You kind of opens some doors about who the real players are and what's may or may not be going on. I mean, I think what we're exposed to in the mainstream, at least, is level one in this situation. It's Epstein and Maxwell have personally abused minors. So when you go up to the next level, you have to start to introduce other factors, such as the social circles that they moved in, people they knew, which absolutely we can be certain that they knew the Clintons, Kevin Spacey, Donald Trump, Bill Gates, and the British royal family. How often were those people mentioned in the trial?
They were mentioned. I think most of those people you mentioned were, I mean, not the Queen per se, but a royal prince. I think they didn't say his name once, but everybody knew who that was.
I just said the British royal family in general because I think Charles is deserving of being in this wheelhouse, at least for his relationship with Jimmy Savile.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point, which the BBC covered up. So shout out to the BBC.
As always, yeah.
And they actually interviewed me. They didn't use any of my content. They decided not to, but they interviewed me. So I've been interviewed by the BBC, I can say now.
Well,
that's
nice.
Pretty cool. Even though they didn't publish it.
Yeah, you probably said something they didn't like. But yeah, so these people aren't mentioned too often, or in what context are they?
Yeah,
mentioned?
I think it's growing, with this alternative people's media, free media, new media, public intelligence movement, truth media, whatever people call it, the truth sphere, or what you said, what the conspiracy culture.
Yeah, it's hard to come up with the words without essentially slurring ourselves, isn't it?
Yeah, right.
Because
right.
that was the reason they invented conspiracy theorist was precisely to, discredit and whatnot.
Yeah, and somebody pointed that out. It's like she's literally been charged with conspiracy, 3 times. So.
Yeah. So I mean, those people weren't. Well, they were mentioned a bit, but I mean, obviously, is it possible at this stage for this investigation to branch out into them? Because obviously, if she has been trafficking minors, given the volume of numbers that have been spoken about of people, she had to have been trafficking them to somebody, not just Epstein. He's only one man, It's
yes, yeah, that's a great point too. Which I was going to bring up is, where's the other co-conspirators? Where the Johns, the clients? Really bizarre. If this was you or I, man, Lord have mercy on your soul, for being in the federal prison system or any prison with the sort of charges the government would give you, which they really haven't given Ghislaine Maxwell, which I said before, she was undercharged. So yeah, in that sense, that's a great point you bring up there. But yeah, the other people mentioned, it was actually the defense who brought them up. Just a few names though. It was like Spacey and Trump was brought up. I want to say Tucker was. We know Tucker. I don't know if Tucker was brought up in court, but not very many. It was the big ones we already knew about. But yeah, as far as further arrests, why was Sarah Kellen not, called to trial as a witness or a protected witness? She's just going to plead the fifth the whole time. Does that mean they are thinking about taking her into custody? That would be going down the chain. I want to see both, though. People say either or. I want to see down and up this whole chain, root and stem, as they say, right? So, yeah, up the chain, that would be your Wexners. That would be your, in socially speaking, that would be those people you mentioned, Spacey, who's got his own trial, I think, coming up.
But if there's any witnesses left alive.
Yeah, and that's something that's not my expertise, but I've heard about that. I've heard that's been happening. So, and that's another thing that's, I think, maybe a trope almost of these sorts of events or sequences of events. Maybe is a better way to put it. So yeah, but other names, not really. They're heavily redacted flight manifests at the behest of the government and Maureen Comey and her prosecution. which included Laura Pomerantz, Allison Moe, and Andrew Rohrbach. So very politically correct prosecution team, you could say. Rohrbach is openly gay, and then 3 women. And then on the defense, you had Christian Everdale, who was the youngest. I thought he was the most charismatic that I saw, besides maybe Sternheim. But Sternheim's more like charismatic outside of the court almost. It's kind of funny because the actual work she did during the trial, I wasn't too impressed with. Although she, I think, had the most seniority on that team. Menninger got the most court time, I would say. Although, you know, it was shared pretty evenly. I think Joe Neerman pointed out. So, but yeah, I'd say Menninger got slightly more. And you know, Everdale was decent. Pomerantz was pretty great, but again, the government was pretty bland. You know, we were just so like, what did they say? Chomping at the bit, or like almost salivating for something huge to happen, and it never really happened in an intelligence sense. A legal sense, there was a couple big moments, like when it was proven that, well, I guess I can say her name now. The trial was over. Nadia Marchinkova, who was Epstein's assistant, has the same name, the first name, as Nadia Borlin. So the defense was trying to say, oh, you can't tell me it wasn't Marchinkova. But then the second pilot, I think his name is David Rogers, he said, I had never met Marchinkova until 2003. And Jane, Nadia Borlin of, what's it called? Some soap opera, Days of Our Lives or something like that. She had been spotted on the flight manifest and by the pilot in 1996. I think it was November 1996. Maybe it was the 11th or the 9th, something like that. Anyway, it was November 1996, proving it was not Nadia Marchinkova. So I thought that was a pretty big wow moment. But yeah, as far as big exposures, nothing really too much new learned in the trial.
So you're saying that was the government prosecution that asked for the flight logs to be redacted?
Yes, yeah, they were very.
Did they say why?
You know, I don't know the exact quote, but again, it was. You know, here's an example. There was some evidence that was possibly going to be admitted. It was the schoolgirl outfits that would, you know, have been admitted under evidence because Caroline got sent a schoolgirl outfit when she was, I think, 16 or 15. And so it would have been compelling, I think, for the government to show the jury at least he had this sort of predilection, you know, or maybe, you know, who's to say how probative that evidence would be, but you would think it would have helped, right? But they didn't want to admit it because they felt it would have been basically insensitive to the witnesses and the victims. I'm paraphrasing. I don't know what the exact words were, but that was the argument, really. And it's like, are you trying to win or not? You know, you are the freaking government of the United States. You run the world as far as the military goes, and you're afraid to hurt somebody's feelings to enact your justice, your power, really, is probably a better way to put it, which they selectively do. I think we can say at this point. Hopefully everyone knows that by now. But
yeah. So one of the names brought up was Donald Trump, and he's an interesting character in this whole situation. I followed QAnon pretty extensively. I don't think I'd be the only person whose eyes are opened to Epstein Island because of that. Even prior to becoming president, there's a few quotes from Donald Trump referencing that Epstein was going to be in trouble shortly. Legally was the implication. There's a clip floating around from like 2015, I think.
You raised the question of Jeffrey Epstein in your remarks about in the Q&A.
Well, I think he's got a problem. I mean,
what do you think the problem will be?
I don't know, but that island was really a cesspool. There's no question about it. Just ask Prince Andrew. He'll tell you about it. The island was an absolute cesspool. So
the Clintons are friends
and he's
of
been
yours,
there
right?
for many times.
The Clintons are friends.
Well, I can't say friends, but I know
You're friendly. You know them.
They play at my clubs a lot. I have clubs, and everybody likes to play at my clubs.
Are you saying there's a political problem for her if she runs for president?
It could be a political problem. Look, he could be a political problem.
To this day, Donald Trump Jr. is going pretty hard on Maxwell on social media. So he's quite a hard one to read in this situation. I can't. Well, I have no idea where to place him. I mean, could he be a good guy, or is he also going to be, it turns out, one of the perpetrators in this situation?
Yeah, there was an accuser. I think her name was Kate Johnson, and I want to say, don't quote me on this, but I want to say it was Ed Opperman who did an investigation on her behalf. But she asserted that Trump had, I think, raped her. But I don't know that it went anywhere legally. So I wasn't too sure about that. But
is that the one from the mid-90s at Mar-a-Lago?
I think you're right. I think
they're
you're
supposedly arguing about who was going to take somebody's virginity.
Yes, I think you're right. Yeah.
I think that one got thrown out and discredited as being garbage, but that's
what I thought too. Because there was one which, there prior to the trial, there was a lot of misinformation coming out. I don't know if it was disinformation. You never know people's intentions. But Adam Baldwin and then consequently Tim Kennedy, the MMA fighter, were saying that no media at all were allowed in the courtroom, which just wasn't true. Then you had Jack Posobiec. He just said a bunch of BS over the course of the trial. Jurors going missing. He said something at the tail end. He said too. I don't know. I just kind of stopped paying attention to Jack Posobiec, to be honest. I unfollowed him. But he said something else that I think Chris Don picked up, or maybe it was Nadia. We discussed it in one of our group chats. So at least three things I think he said that was just total BS about the trial. And I can't recall where I was going with that one. What did you ask?
The Trump. Where does he stand in all of this?
Oh, right. Yeah, that. Yeah, so it was like the Latham versus the 1954 trust, which I think was the year that Epstein was born, was 54, if I'm not mistaken. And it was thrown out as, I think, being frivolous and without merit by the judge. So it sounded like that's what happened to Kate Johnson's assertion. So in that sense, I'm not sure that it's appropriate to assert that publicly, unless it was a cover-up. I'm not saying it's not possible. It could have been a stitch-up. But, I mean, you'd think they would have went after that, especially now that Trump is no longer in power, But I actually didn't know that about Trump. You'll have to send me that video if you can find it. The fact that he said that, he's definitely in the know on stuff before we know it. I would say more often than not.
Yeah, it's like I say, it's a very strange one to read. I mean, it certainly ends up getting into the realms of partisan politics, doesn't it? Because people will say, "Oh, he was friends with the Clintons and whatnot," and then you'll just see the replies, and it's all just, "Yeah, but Trump," and it goes nowhere. That's not the point. It's, if everyone's involved in this, get everyone. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter who. I don't care what their politics are at that point. It doesn't matter,
Yeah, definitely. I didn't vote in the last election, which I think was something I'm glad that didn't happen.
Are you sure? Have you checked the register?
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe I did vote.
Maybe you did.
I'll have to see who I voted for later. But
I'll give you a guess.
yeah, right. Yeah, and that's a whole nother discussion too. Which we mentioned the 6th too. It's like people's interpretations of this are so twisted by the mainstream media. Like it's I can't even watch them. Those guys, like, I can't remember the old white guy's name, but MSNBC, CNN, like Rachel Maddow.
Yeah, but it's the worst day in American history since Pearl Harbor, don't you know?
Oh my goodness, don't you know? Yeah, right. It's just so offensive. This is the vice president of the United States saying this. It's just so. I don't think it's treasonous, but it's so disrespectful. I wouldn't say they're
disingenuous, because she knows fine well that 9/11 happened.
Yeah, it's also disingenuous. Yeah, very, very disingenuous, disrespectful. You could even say disgusting, when you think about what she's actually talking about and what she's comparing it to. I mean, there's literally old people in wheelchairs at this event.
It doesn't even actually make any sense, because the majority of people weren't around for Pearl Harbor. 99% of people were around for 9/11. Therefore, why don't you just say it was the worst day since 9/11 and people will appreciate the context more?
Yeah.
It's a stupid thing to say more than anything.
Yeah. She might have said, I think she said 2 dates. I can't remember if it was 9/11 or JFK. It might have been JFK.
I've not heard her say JFK. I would have.
Okay. Yeah, it was. She mentioned a couple dates. One of them was Pearl Harbor. But I mean, that's a great point you mentioned about Epstein's death. Is like, wow, this is a day like, it's like a 9/11, JFK, Pearl Harbor, Epstein getting killed.
Well, it was based on the idea that that's Pandora's box opened. You thought, right, okay, he's gone down. Here we go. And then COVID hits, and you're like, okay, well, that's good timing, isn't it?
Very good timing. Very.
So I'd mentioned we're on like a level system here. So going up a level is like the reasons why this happened, who was really working for who, and we kind of touched on the idea of an intelligence operation. So some strange connections that I noted. You've got Ghislaine's father, Robert Maxwell, who was involved with Mossad. I think that's fairly out in the open. He dies a mysterious death on his yacht named after his daughter. He purchased that yacht from Ahmed Khashoggi, who people might recognize the name. His cousin was Jamal Khashoggi, who gets chopped up in the Saudi embassy.
Yep.
They have another cousin, Dodi Al-Fayed, who is, of course, with the exiled royal Princess Diana and dies in the same car crash as her. So that's, if you add in Epstein, that's a lot of mysterious deaths in a small social circle. So, I mean,
yes,
it looks like those people were taken out for whatever reason. So it would point more towards a compromise intelligence operation, possibly. Certainly the concept of getting these prominent people into situations that are wildly inappropriate with minors, for example, might be what the game was that Epstein was playing. Maxwell facilitating that. But then, like I say, you have to. The question is who's given these orders and why. It makes you worry almost, like how many political decisions have been made in bad faith because of somebody in the shadows telling whomever they have to do something because of the bad things they've done.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like, do you think that's where we're at? Or
yes, I think America basically runs on blackmail, it seems, a lot of the time. I would say, maybe not all the time, but a lot of the time. I think Jim Garrison said it. He's like something to the effect of killing a man, or for an intelligence agency, killing a man is as easy as swatting a fly. And sexual blackmail underage is the best type of way to covertly control someone. You don't have to go and stick a gun in their face if they know that you can blackmail them for the rest of their life, right? So in that sense, it's the best way to control somebody from an intelligence agency's perspective. You're either an asset or a liability. You mentioned Adnan Khashoggi. He's actually a very famous, I would say, in our circles anyways, weapons trafficker, international weapons dealer. Like you mentioned, cousins with Jamal, who also is asserted to have been tied directly to intelligence. But he was chopped up by his own government.
Yeah, strange, worrying. In terms of trafficking, there's some other strange connections with Epstein, just bits and pieces. I mean, the source of his wealth is one thing people are certainly curious about.
For sure.
His plane, I believe, shared a tail number with a CIA aircraft and a DynCorp aircraft, DynCorp being a military contractor who were accused of sex trafficking in the Balkans.
You've done your homework, Matthew. I gotta say, you've done your homework. that actually right there, it's quite contentious. It's people aren't sure if that's true or not. It looks legitimate to me. I got to say, I haven't said this to a couple of people who very vehemently disagree with that story, which I think Hopsicker did, Daniel Hopsicker. So I don't know. I'll double check it, but it seems credible to me. I mean, it wouldn't be surprising, given those companies' histories. And, we discussed Epstein's ties to intelligence, Evergreen Aviation, Rickenbacker Airport, Columbus, Ohio. There was a time you could call, I got this from a local source, you could call Rickenbacker and Epstein would pick up. So what else was going on there? I think there was a lot going on. It's like drugs, weapons, and people, type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, whether it's all true or not is the is the key factor. And there's so much noise, misinformation, disinformation, stories flying around.
Yeah.
It gets.
And another thing too I wanted to mention is also contentious was whether he was an FBI informant, which I said, oh yeah, he was, but then I was basing this off a story from, I think it was OK Magazine, that had no author and no reference or source cited. But then we have this document now that says, I think it was part of the MPA. Oh yeah, Epstein gave the FBI the information as agreed upon, something to that effect. I'm actually going to retweet it today. I'm going to tweet it out. And what is that? What information is he giving to the FBI? Maybe he was an informant. They're very vague about what does that mean? That's all they said. Is he gave information to the FBI as agreed upon. Whatever that is, we probably won't ever officially know the details.
Well, that's the thing with the intelligence agencies. I mean, we probably know 1% of what they get up to in general. I mean, that's the whole point, isn't it? They're in they're secret intelligence agencies. We're not meant to know, but then we pay for them. So it's not on really, is it? But I mean, in terms of other strangeness, apparently his plane supposedly flew to Antarctica after he hangs himself. That's unusual.
Oh, it did.
It definitely did.
Wow.
No, I'm asking you.
I
saw there was a story going around. There was people saying, on the flight tracker things, people had it tagged in Antarctica or something.
Yeah, that's really bizarre. That is really bizarre.
It is odd.
Those are cool. Like the guys that do the aerial intelligence. It's good stuff. That's what I love about the internet. Everybody's kind of pitching in their own way to finding out what's actually going on.
What do you make of his contact with prominent scientists? I mean, I remember seeing an article where it was said he wanted to seed his DNA by impregnating multiple women, like in a similar manner to Genghis Khan. I think there was an interview with Maria Farmer. I think it might have been on the Generation Z podcast. I'm not sure, but she basically said the Zorro Ranch had underground laboratories.
Yeah, and they had 2 basements in Epstein's 71st Street apartment too. It wasn't a huge deal made about that, but that came out during this trials. There was 2 basements there. So that's, what's going on there, and the idea they had this submarine passageway between Biden Island, which is Water Island, and Epstein Island, or maybe multiple islands. Somebody, I think it was Steve from the guy from Slow News Day was saying, they don't care or even think about nationalities. They just kind of use countries as cities, almost like this is where they party, this is where they work. It's they're globalists in that sense, but yeah, intelligence ties are deep, and I think shadowy basements are part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just concerning that the idea of him wanting to seed his DNA. So, I mean, do you think in a couple of 1,000 years we'll all be saying, "Oh, you can directly trace your your DNA back to Jeffrey Epstein" or something like that?
Yeah, and I mean, to my knowledge, he had 0 kids. But yeah, I did hear about that. And you asked about the scientists. It's been contended that was his main job, was to blackmail scientists and technologists to steal science. and technology, because that is the information that has the most power potential to control the world. Obviously the Mossad stole the atomic bomb intelligence via the Promise software, which was marketed and sold by Bob Maxwell via this front company called Degem or Degem, Degem. It might be Degem. It's Murray Gell-Mann, I think his name is, or Gelman. And then there was obviously Steven Pinker, who's a Harvard scientist. I think he's a cognitive scientist. And there's a few other we know of, but not just scientists too. It's almost like the political blackmail maybe was a cushion for the science and technology, or Ari Ben Minash said the Israelis have always taken it to the extreme. So perhaps it was just an all-out, experiment. And as far as what blackmail can achieve for as far as gathering intelligence and stealing it.
Yeah, certainly possible. I mean, in terms of it being Mossad and Israel alone, I think it's probably fair to say, like you were saying about these elites are considering like countries as cities, almost like cross borders. I think there's a fair chance that Mossad is working hand in hand with the CIA, the Saudi intelligence, MI5, MI6, etc., to create like a bad actors within that, like an intelligence deep state, as it were, who are laws unto themselves for whatever reason, whatever they're up to, which we dread to think, of course.
I said this once, and I was, I guess, corrected by Jeff Prather. I said there is illegal, but they're extra legal. They're outside of the law. So in that sense, that's why they can do whatever they want, with their Special Activities Division, SAD, over at the CIA. But yeah, I mean, they overlap. We were working with Nazi intelligence monsters, from World War II before the war was even over. And there's, not to mention moles, traitors within any side. That I think muddies the situation. But never mind that. It's I think more important to point out they actively do voluntarily work together in symbiotic relationships. In that sense, Epstein's death was, I think, could likely be asserted a joint operation between MI6, CIA, FBI, and Mossad, and the Department of Justice, and the detention center in Manhattan.
Yeah. I mentioned Maria Farmer earlier. Another part of the interview that she gave, and I also mentioned about the noise and things getting wild with misinformation and disinformation and QAnon, and there's probably a middle ground between the truth of everything here. She hinted that the people who abused her may or may not be human. This is when you get into like top level conspiracy stuff, but in the eyes of your average person in the street, this discredits the rest of the things by association to it at times, but it's certainly worth exploring. I mean, this is probably where you tie in things like Pizzagate, the satanic pedophile cabal, ritual child sacrifice, adrenochrome, reptilians, etc. I mean, I find Miss Farmer to be really interesting. In particular, the painting that she did, which is particularly disturbing. I think you've probably seen it. It appears on the Netflix documentary about Epstein. I mean, as somebody who does the grassroots work, goes into courtrooms, does the reporting on it, where do you stand on those sort of things? How do you compartmentalize them, as it were? Like, what do you do with that information?
I'm not sure what you mean.
The comparatively to the work you're doing, where you are literally going in and getting facts out of a courtroom.
Yeah.
How do you deal with the fact that in the broadest picture of this story, there are things like Pizzagate, reptilians, ritual child sacrifice, that sort of thing? How do you avoid that? Do you want to avoid that? Where does it sit with you? Do you know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah. It's tough to say. Lot to discuss here. I think I think those things go on for sure. I don't see why people would lie about that. There's people I think in the United Kingdom, especially England, with regards to the state care system there, they testify to a lot of ridiculous stuff that goes on. I had on my own podcast, Darren Jeffrey speak out for the first time as a victim of that system in England. And he describes some of the things that went on. But I try not to make things stretch too much. And when I do bring forth ideas as possibilities, I try to make that clear instead of stating them as fact or as objective when it's really just an idea I have. Or maybe there's a lot of circumstantial evidence there. That's a lot of, I think, what we deal with. So in that sense, it can be hard to delineate. But I don't, ascribe to some sort of philosophy or ideology whereby I can't take a look at something on its own. I think it's hard to do, especially because there are people who at this trial I would describe more so as activists than journalists, even though they probably disagree. I think they were very colored in their perspective from the start. Not that I wasn't, but I think much more readily able or willing to interpret events as being beneficial for them. When in fact, I think there were many times when that was not the case, when they thought it was, or maybe to a lesser degree than they thought it was. So I do try to remain as objective as I can, but all of those things are related, but it's hard to prove, that sort of stuff. And, it's, the people who do, allegedly, which, if we believe a lot of these victims, they're some of the most powerful people on the planet. So they have the ability to take people out, so, and that ties into Epstein too. It's like, why was this guy just randomly from Brooklyn able to blackmail the most powerful men in the world and not just have 4 guys show up at his house and take care of him one Friday night, which is very easy to do for all the people he was blackmailing? Well, it's because he had a very, very powerful entity behind him to the point where he could scare anyone, really. And it's like, who is that? And, we know it's the intelligence community.
Yeah. I think that's probably a fair conclusion. I mean, on Twitter, you referenced a Slate.com article, which it was seeking to marginalize people in the conspiracy community who believe that Epstein and Maxwell's crimes are part of something bigger.
That's a good way to put it, I would say.
The marginalization of people who have a broader interest of the subject has essentially, it's created this journalistic vacuum, which has been filled by people like yourself, Whitney Webb, Glenn Greenwald, even Joe Rogan. I mean, what's your thoughts about this sort of media response?
Yeah, that guy's name is Seth Stevenson. I met him, spoke with him a few times. He seemed pretty nice to me, to be honest. So not really sure why he wrote that. It's tough to say. He still follows me on Twitter though, so that's kind of interesting. But there was, I think, 1, maybe 2 people who would attend the trial regularly who were pretty out there, as far as maybe being Q. I think Kristan said 1 person was, but I didn't meet this person, so I'm not sure who that was. But there are definitely some eccentric types there. I wouldn't, just because you're eccentric though doesn't mean you're associated with Q. But yeah, it was weird. It's like there were times when there was one time in particular where I was, the people around me were chatting to the point where I was like, okay, guys, this is annoying. But that was during a break, so it was like I can just get up and walk away. It's like I don't have to be there. So that didn't bother me too much. But I mean, we would regularly discuss what was going on with Joe Neerman, who's a litigator from New York, during breaks. So it's not like it was a sports bar as he declared. There was one day that was, when was that? It might have been one of the days the defense was presenting their case, which is only 2 days. There was a ton of people there I had never seen before. And that day, outside in the hallway, there was like 30 people, and they were all just talking. So that was kind of loud, but it wasn't like that was the group, because there was like people that you would meet. Like I probably talked to more people than anybody who attended the trial. Most people just kind of stick in their bubbles. But I got there early and I learned people's schedules, and I learned people who was who basically, and just would talk to people. And in that sense, I got a pretty good idea of what was going on. But there was a degree of, I think, camaraderie that developed over the course of the trial amongst people, particularly the independent podcasters and writers, I thought. So that was pretty fun. But we invited the mainstreamers to, like, Joe Neerman's show, his roundtable, for example, and none of them showed up. Yeah, it's bizarre. It's one thing. That's why I appreciated Adam Classfield, because he just came out and said no. He was polite about it, but it's not like he led me on, right? Adam Classfield did not lead me on, guys. So I respect him for that. Whereas a few other people were like a little wishy-washy, shall we say, or smoke and mirrors about saying and meaning things. But we extended invites to them, and they said no. So it just kind of formed organically in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, like you say, I mean, it's good that you guys are there covering these things extensively, in the absence of the mainstream media properly covering these things. I mean, like, there was barely a word mentioned, certainly in the papers here, until the day she was found guilty, which is certainly strange. And now it seems to it's ramped up now that Andrew's back on the table for his civil case with Virginia Roberts.
Yeah,
that's an interesting one. Where do you think that's heading?
Yeah, before I address that, I wanted to say I do agree with what you said. There's like a power vacuum that the mainstream media themselves have created in these sort of situations, and in the media in general. I think you could apply it to any aspect of the news. The media has failed in their capacity to do what they're supposed to do, and in that sense created a demand and, in fact, a bull market for coverage of geopolitics, news, current events, and I would say even history at this point. But as far as Prince Andrew, Virginia Giuffre versus Prince Andrew, the civil suit, Prince Andrew is not cooperating with the government or the FBI, in case people didn't know that. But they just presented on Tuesday their motion to dismiss. Andrew's lawyers did. His lead lawyer, his name is Brettler. He sounded American to me, his accent did, so I guess he's American. And it didn't seem to go well. We're still awaiting a response from Judge Lewis Kaplan, who's older than Judge Nathan. Seems to be more conservative, much more hardline, strict judge, and didn't seem to respond well to many, if all, any at all, of the defense's arguments. So still awaiting a decision there. But if I was a betting man, I would say this is going to go forward, which I find surprising. But we're appreciative of the fact that there was a call in line at all, because again, there wasn't for Ghislaine Maxwell's trial. But again, that saga in itself, or that chapter of the Maxwell saga, is still continuing, as we discussed with this juror gate. Yeah,
and Andrew's story certainly. I enjoyed his defense, which is essentially, I didn't know her, I don't recall her, but if I did know her, then I'm actually covered by this agreement that Roberts Giuffre had with Epstein from years ago. I mean, how is that?
Yeah.
Was that a credible defense? I mean, I assume you've seen the interview he did with the BBC 2 years ago.
Yeah. Yes, I did.
Jesus Christ. I mean, like, he's very clever in one of his responses, because Emily Maitlis flat out asks him, well, is Virginia Giuffre lying? And he goes, well, I wouldn't say that, no. I just don't recall meeting her or the event. So he says something to that effect, because he knows he doesn't want to make himself open to defamation of character and whatnot. So it's
sure. Yeah, he's
He shouldn't have given that interview.
Yeah, a big, oh man, colossal blunder. Definitely a blunder. And I'm not even sure how he was allowed to do that. I guess the royal family members have more autonomy than I thought they did. You would have thought that somebody would have disallowed him from doing that, but I guess he had enough power to schedule that interview
or at
himself.
least properly vetted questions or something. But
yeah. Don't know what happened there, but definitely a blunder on the royal family side and whoever roots for them, which for me is a huge sticking point. It's like I just don't understand monarchists. It doesn't make any sense. It's hard for me to. I don't see this on the front, but I see a few underlying tones of racial supremacy in the idea of a monarchy, in a way, or at least blood supremacy, certainly. But that's a whole nother discussion entirely. But thanks for having me on your show, Matthew. This is really fun, and you proved to me that there are people out there that know a lot of details about what's going on here. So that's pretty great to find out.
Yeah, it's just finding the connectivity, as it were. I mean, where can people find more information about yourself? Yeah, I assume you're going to be covering things going forward with Maxwell and Andrew.
Yes, I am. I will be doing that. Hopefully it doesn't take too much of my time, because I'm a bit ADHD sometimes. I like a variety of topics. So I am. So I'm going to continue to do so. Twitter is a good spot for that. It's one Addy Adds, one spelled out ONEADDYADDS. I also just got a Getter, so if people are on Getter, they can add me on there. I'm sending people to Rockfin right now for video, which is also rockfin.com/Addy Adds, ADDYADDS. Rockfin is ROKFIN. If you just type in Addy Adds into a search engine, I like to use DuckDuckGo. It should pop up as well. And I got the usual Facebook, Instagram. Instagram, I've been growing a bit. I need to get better at using it. I'm not really sure how many.
I have no idea how to use it. I'm an old man in technology terms now.
Yeah, I just don't know how many times I can post. Can I post more than once a day, do you think? Or I don't know. If somebody wants to let me know. I've just decided to say F it recently. Actually, it was yesterday, and I posted twice, I think. So we'll see if I lose followers, but I seem to be gaining them and maybe losing some. But my Twitter definitely blew up over the course of this trial. I'm also on PeerTube at vid.addyadds.us, pretty much strictly for posterity, but you can sign up for an account there if you like. But preferably Rockfin is where I'm sending people. And then for patronage and support, donations, buymeacoffee.com/Addy Adds, Venmo, and Cash App. But Buy Me a Coffee is great because it's international, so people can send money from outside the United States as well. If you're American, Cash App and Venmo are the best. Also on Patreon and Subscribestar too. So if people want to help out. Oh, and then I got a Telegram too at one Addy Adds, just in case they get canceled.
Which you inevitably will do sooner or later.
I hope you're wrong. But I think you're probably, I don't know. The odds are probably in your favor.
Well, I don't want to be right. That's the thing. I don't want to be right on any of this stuff, to be quite honest.
Sure.
It's all very bleak, isn't it? But on that happy note, thanks for joining me.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Join us next time for the Political Dark Side Podcast.
It's a disaster. Whose idea was that? It's just ridiculous.
Available on iTunes, Google, and Spotify.
For more information, visit politicaldarkside.com.